I must admit to being very upset at both Congressmen Peter Meijer and Congressman Seth Moulton. Why? During this evacuation in Afghanistan, two Congress people going out there wasting these guys' time, and that was my opinion, to just go out there and see for themselves. I thought it was a publicity stunt. And I thought they were going to go there and attempt to really go and attack the administration for ending a war. I kind of looked at it as them being pawns of the defense industrial complex. Of course, I didn't do any research to see who gives them money, etc., etc., etc. But upon their return, I think I've had to eat some of my words, in that I think, in as much as they didn't come back to defend the greatness of Biden leaving Afghanistan, which nobody is doing. Of course, we want him to leave Afghanistan. We're happy that we left Afghanistan. They did say that they think it could have been done differently. I beg to differ based on how wars work, and whether this had happened in May or whether this happened in October. There was going to be a rush on whatever airport, Bagram or the main airport, because I tell you what they don't tell you. Bagram would have meant getting people a far distance from Afghanistan, from Kabul, to get them there, and all kinds of things could happen on the way there as well. So, I mean, everybody wants to be the quarterback after the fact. But that said, their response, I think, when they came back, because of who they are, two previous officers, and because the rhetoric that they came back with didn't seem a defense of Biden or a aggressive attack on Biden. It simply said, under these situations, we just couldn't see any other options. I want you to take a look at this, and then we'll take it on the other side.
Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts and Peter Meijer of Michigan, both Iraq war veterans, have been sharply criticized since their return by the Biden administration, the Pentagon, and their own colleagues in Congress for their unannounced trip to Kabul last Tuesday. They say it was an attempt to get answers that they're not getting from the Biden administration. And they came back with a much different view of things, they say. Congressman Democrat Seth Moulton and Republican Peter Meijer join us now. Before we get to what you saw and learned, Congressman Moulton, let me start with you. Congressman Moulton, 11 of the 13 Americans killed in Thursday's attack were Marines. You're a retired Marine captain. President Biden's defenders, as you heard Jake Sullivan earlier in the show, they say this exit was always going to be chaotic. There was always going to be the risk of loss of life, including American lives. Do you agree? And how much of what happened Thursday do you think is the result of bad planning as opposed to just trying to get out of a war? Congressman Meijer, you and Congressman Moulton both went to Kabul thinking that the August 31st deadline needs to be extended. But what you saw there changed your mind. Why? What changed your mind?
We realized that we did not have that leverage. We were wholly dependent on the cooperation of the Taliban. It's a position we should have never been in. It's an absurd scenario. It's an upside-down world that is not lost on any of the folks on the ground. But just the fact of how vulnerable our forces were, not only against ISIS and Khorasan, as we saw with the attack on Abbey Gate on Thursday, but just the way in which we had to work with the Taliban just meters apart from one another. We did not have an option. If it came down to an urban conflict, urban combat scenario, you are talking about a multiplied casualty count. You are talking about grave civilian harm. And you're also talking about the fact that we would not be able to get our Afghan allies and American citizens who are trapped in Afghanistan. We wouldn't even be able to get them into the airport. So we are not in a good scenario, bad scenario. This is the least worst of the options that are before us, but we should have never been in this position in the first place.
Congressman Meijer, I'll start with you. Was the war in Afghanistan worth it? Worth the cost, the American lives, the Afghan lives, the $2 trillion? Was it worth it?
I think it's impossible to sit here today and say yes, knowing what we know, knowing what we saw. I mean, we've seen some of the best of the American people, especially in the last 2 weeks, some of the best of our troops on the ground and the heroic way they're carrying out this mission. But we've also seen some of the worst of American leadership. And if you draw this over the past 2 decades, at any one year, you could say, what is our mission there? And you'd get a different answer from the other 19. I mean, we should have never, There needs to be unsparing accountability. We should have never put our American men and women in this position. And we need to realign our strategic and operational priorities to ensure that it never happens again. This is a failure upon failure.
Congressman Moulton?
I mean, Peter's right. It's failure upon failure. And the one way I could only imagine this going worse is if it had happened under Trump with the May 1st deadline even earlier. And he probably wouldn't have had any effort to evacuate our allies because he's so anti-immigrant. I mean, there was no airlift after he retreated from Syria. But the point is that this has been the failure of multiple administrations. But let's not forget in all of this what this says about us as a people. One thing that Peter and I are so committed to is telling the story of those brave Americans, not only servicemen and women, but consular officials at the gates, at Abbey Gate, literally saving thousands of lives. That represents the absolute best of America. And that's a story that everybody in the world and every single American needs to hear.
And I tell you, did you hear that unfortunate truth? The unfortunate truth that, yes, the Afghanistan war was not worth it. Yes, August 31st was likely the best time for us to leave, given the current circumstances. Yes, maybe things could have been done better, but as I said before, that is very unlikely for any occupier that is leaving. To put it bluntly, the fact that they got out of Afghanistan without any major, look, the 13 heroes that perished, Supreme Being bless them. It hurts every time I think about it, because I remember that statement that Kerry said in Congress several decades ago. Something about the last to die for a war that shouldn't have been. And that's how I feel about those 13. But unfortunately, that is exactly what it took to save thousands of lives, thousands of American lives, thousands of Afghans' lives. Meijer and Moulton, apologies, but you did a great job. We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.